Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating period of history. We're going to see exactly how an imperialist war over in Europe acted as a massive catalyst for India's nationalist movement between 1914 and 1919. It's an incredible story of how global conflict unexpectedly accelerated the push for Indian self-government, literally yanking the conversation out of the debating halls of the educated elite and taking it straight to the masses.
So how exactly did a global conflict unify a famously divided Indian political landscape? Well, when Britain allied against Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey back in 1914, it completely drained India of its troops. To put that into perspective, at one point, the number of white British soldiers in India dropped down to just 15,000. This massive, sudden shift in the global balance of power created this huge vacuum, a really unique environment that Indian nationalists were incredibly quick to respond to.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. The WW1 catalyst, 2. The Home Rule Leagues, 3. The rise and fall of agitation, 4. The 1916 Lucknow Session, 5. The historic Lucknow Pact, and 6. Montague's 1917 August Statement.
Let's jump into Section 1, the WWI catalyst, a divided response.
Okay, so let's look at how Indian leaders actually reacted when Britain declared war in 1914. Because right at this moment in history, there was absolutely no single unified voice. You basically had three distinct camps. First, you had the moderates. They believed in constitutional petitioning, and they felt that supporting the empire was just their duty, period. Then you had the extremists, like Gangadhar Tilak, who favored more direct action. They threw their support behind the war effort too, but they did it under the somewhat mistaken belief that Britain would repay India's loyalty with self-government. And finally, the revolutionaries. They looked at the whole situation, Britain totally distracted, their troops depleted, and they saw a heaven-sent opportunity to wage war on British rule, even seeking military and financial help from Britain's enemies.
Moving on to Section 2, the Home Rule Leagues, mobilizing the masses. As the war dragged on, things got really tough. Wartime miseries, especially heavy taxation, set the stage for a totally new, aggressive political strategy that was actually inspired by the Irish. It was the perfect storm. You had everyday people feeling the intense economic squeeze of wartime taxation and soaring prices. At the same time, everyone is watching these major imperialist powers tear each other apart using blatant propaganda, which completely shattered the old myth of white European superiority. Add to this mix the release of Tilak in 1914, plus the arrival of Besant, an Irish theosophist, pushing hard for a movement modeled on the Irish Home Rule Leagues, and boom, the spark was fully lit.
What's fascinating is that two parallel efforts emerged with the exact same goal. Tilak moved first in April 1916. He created a tightly focused, highly regional league. Besant followed a few months later with this massive nationwide network. They purposefully set up separate leagues to avoid any friction between their followers, but make no mistake, they coordinated beautifully. The core aim for both of them was identical. Take the concept of home rule, of self-government, and bring it directly to the common person, using public meetings, reading rooms, and pamphlets.
Look at how ridiculously fast this momentum built. The grassroots groundwork that Tilak and Besant laid in mid-1916 translated into massive, undeniable political unity by that December, and it actually forced a formal policy shift from the British Empire by the following August. We're talking about a movement that pushed India from scattered grassroots agitation to major empire-shifting political milestones in just over a single year.
Let's head into Section 3, Rise and Fall of Agitation, Government Backlash and Decline.
Now, naturally, this massive surge in political education and public meetings provoked a very strong reaction from the British government. They weren't just going to sit idly by while this home rule message spread like wildfire. But their severe repression completely backfired. There's this incredibly colorful quote from the Secretary of State, Edwin Montagu, that hits the nail on the head. He said, "Shiva cut his wife into 52 pieces only to discover that he had 52 wives. This is what happens to the government of India when it interns Mrs. Besant." Students were barred from meetings, leaders were restricted, but when they interned Besant in June 1917, it just invited nationwide outrage. Sir S. Subramanyaya Iyer even renounced his knighthood in a dramatic gesture of defiance. The crackdown literally just hardened everyone's resolve.
But despite its massive initial impact, the whole agitation actually faded out by 1919. So what happened? Well, it was a mix of overlapping internal divisions and some strategic external British concessions. Besant kind of wavered on how to respond to newly proposed British reforms, and then Tilak actually had to travel to England for a libel case against Valentine Chirol, who had written a book called Indian Unrest. So with Besant struggling to provide a clear path forward and Tilak out of the country, the movement suddenly found itself effectively leaderless, combined with the tragic eruption of communal riots.
Section 4. The 1916 Lucknow Session, a unified Congress.
Before the agitation faded, though, it achieved something truly monumental in December 1916. It brought the divided Indian National Congress back together. The moderate president of the session, A.C. Majumdar, summed it up perfectly. He said both wings realized that united they stand, but divided they fall. This marked the absolutely critical readmission of the extremists, led by Tilak, repairing a really painful 10-year split. As Majumdar put it, it was the end of nearly 10 years of painful separation and wandering through the wilderness. The Home Rule Leagues had done it. They successfully revived the Congress as a powerful instrument for Indian nationalism.
Section 5. The historic Lucknow Pact, bridging the communal divide.
But the unity at Lucknow went even further than that. It crossed religious and party lines in a way no one had seen before. The Indian National Congress and the Muslim League joined forces. Now, why did the Muslim League, frustrated by a bunch of British policies, suddenly align with the Congress's push for self-government? Well, younger Muslims were furious over the wartime suppression of leaders like Maulana Azad and the Ali brothers. Throw in the annulment of the partition of Bengal in 1911, the British refusal to help Turkey in the Balkan Wars, and the denial of a university at Aligarh, and you've got this surge of anti-imperialist sentiment that pushed younger radical Muslim League members right into cooperation with the Congress.
To make this work, the Congress agreed to the Muslim League's demand for separate electorates, meaning specific guaranteed seats for Muslim representatives. In exchange, they secured this incredibly powerful, unified list of constitutional demands to hand directly to the British. We're not talking about a vague wish list here. This was a highly specific joint constitutional blueprint. They demanded immediate, tangible shifts in power, from securing elected majorities all the way to insisting that the British Treasury, not Indian funds, pay the Secretary of State's salary.
Section 6. Montagu's 1917 August Statement. The British Concession. Faced with this totally unprecedented united front, the British government realized they had to change their policy drastically. The combined pressure of the Home Rule agitation and the Lucknow Pact was just too big to ignore. So we get the August Declaration of 1917. This is historically massive, because for the first time ever, demanding self-government was no longer legally considered a seditious act by the British. Just pause and think about that shift. Attainment of self-government officially became a stated British policy, promising that rulers would eventually have to answer to elected representatives.
But of course, there was a massive catch. Indian leaders strongly objected to the statement because, well, it lacked any sort of concrete timeline, and it kept all the actual power firmly in British hands. The British retained the absolute right to decide the nature and the timing of any advance toward responsible government. Understandably, Indian nationalists deeply resented the implication that the British, and the British alone, were qualified to decide what was good or bad for the Indian people.
As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at the lasting effects here. The years between 1914 and 1919 permanently transformed Indian politics. It went from polite, elite debates to actual, on-the-ground, grassroots mobilization. The Home Rule Leagues created this incredible organizational link between the big cities and the rural countryside. They brought a sense of absolute urgency to the national movement that just didn't exist before the war.
So I'll leave you with this final thought. Did the Home Rule movement ultimately do the heavy lifting to prepare the masses for the Gandhian era that was just about to begin? By creating an entire generation of ardent, mobilized nationalists ready to take action, this World War I catalyst completely reshaped the landscape of India's future. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how the echoes of our past continue to shape our present.